Welcome back. It's time for me to hand over the virtual reins once again for our final big picture plenary session. Our next moderator is a great friend of ours here at the SDG Global Festival of Action. He's the Chief Communications Officer for the UN Foundation, an international charitable organization set up to help the UN solve the collective action challenges facing our world. And he was previously a BBC journalist and anchor, bringing over 20 years of global reporting experience on everything from the environment to the economy, politics to the Oscars. Please welcome the lovely Rajesh Mirchandani.
Nadira, thank you so much for that flattering introduction. And hello, everyone. It's great to be with you. Great to be back at the SDG Global Festival of Action. I just wish we could be there physically, as I'm sure you do too. And I'm very happy to be hosting this session, which we have, I think, aptly called Ready, Set, Let's Make a Historic Leap Forward. Because we need to turn things around. As you've been hearing throughout the festival so far, the global crises that we are facing right now are an urgent call and an opportunity to revisit our values and behaviors, to design new systems that work for people and the planet, not against them. With the correct balance of innovative ideas, public pressure, political will, and sustainable financing, governments and systems can and will change. Now, depending on where you are, it might be hard to look past the pandemic, but we need to start building the post-COVID world right now together. That's a world that balances economic, social, and environmental progress, just like it says in the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. In this session, addressing some key questions that I hope will give you food for thought for the rest of the festival, such as how do we make globalization work for the good of all people? How do we redesign political systems so they connect on a global scale? And when will we know that we've made that leap forward? Now, we have a great panel, so let's meet them right now. And panelists, because we're all on screens, I'm just going to suggest that when I introduce you, you just give a little wave so everyone can see exactly who you are for now before you get a chance to speak. My first guest made history in 2017 when she became Canada's youngest female cabinet minister. And then she made history again a year later as the first federal cabinet minister in Canada to have a baby while in office. She's a fierce advocate for women, for young people, and for underrepresented groups. And she currently serves as Canada's Minister for International Development. Please give a wave to the Honourable Karina Gould. There you are, Minister. Nice to see you. Very nice to have you with us. Joining us today also is Natasha Mwanza. Natasha is a Zambian health, women's and youth advocate and a passionate journalist and campaigner close to my heart. She started her own self-named foundation, is frequently named as one of the top young change makers, is in fact the youngest ever recipient of the Global Health Leaders Award from the World Health Organization. She says her goal is to be a voice for the voiceless and to equip people to realize that they have a voice that deserves to be heard. Please say hi, Natasha Mwanza. There you go, great to see you. Our third panelist spent much of her career building campaigns to demand greater government accountability and social justice. Her work includes the Don't Break the Promise campaign in India and the global call to action against poverty. She was head of outreach for the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on the post-2015 agenda and the global campaign director for Save the Children International. She currently serves as Secretary General of the Civic Alliance, which is a global alliance of civil society organizations. Please welcome Lisa John. There, hi Lisa, nice to see you again. Our fourth panelist is a celebrated philosopher, speaker, teacher, activist, and intellectual. He's a Yoruba poet and 2 books, which are called These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter, Humanity's Search Home, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. Hello and welcome to you, Bayo Akomolafe. There you go, great. Now we do have a fifth speaker today, but because he's fallen ill very suddenly at the last minute, he's actually going to join us just for a short while, and then we're going to release him to go and, well, not release him, and encourage him to go and rest and get better, because we definitely want him to get better soon, but we're also grateful for any time with him. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a renowned architect and urban planner, working at the intersection of politics and planning and between city and nature. In 2019, at the UN Climate Action Summit, he presented the Great Green Wall of Cities project, developed with several international organizations. Among many notable professors and positions at art and cultural institutions around the world that he enjoys, he is the president of the Triennale di Milano, a groundbreaking exhibition of design and art in Milan, Italy. Please welcome Stefano Boeri. Stefano, great to have you with us, albeit for a short period. Now, panelists, we're going to start with a quick fire question to you all. It's going to be the same question. And the question is this. We're thinking past the crisis about the world we want, a world that's just, equitable and sustainable, where people and planet thrive, and that's going to require a leap. So my question is that I want you all to complete this sentence. We will only make a historic leap forward when, and then you complete the sentence. Now, I'm just going to give you 30 seconds each, just to get you all warmed up. And it's just 30 seconds. So don't overthink it. Just go with whatever comes to mind first of all. Don't forget to unmute. It's your turn. For the rest of the discussion, I do encourage you to jump right in. Don't wait to be called upon to speak. But for this quick fire round, we are going to go in turn. Just 30 seconds, remember. So I would suggest you don't spend your time thanking everyone, saying how nice it is to be here. I think we all know we're all happy to be here. But to give you a little time to think, let me just remind viewers at home or wherever you're watching from that you can take part in the conversation as well via social media. On Twitter, tag your posts with @SDG Action and use the hashtag Turn It Around. I see that many of you have been doing it already. And then if there's time later on in the session, I'll try and read out some of your comments. Okay, now, Stefano Boeri, we know how much you wanted to be part of the festival today. I do want you to go and rest because you're not very well. So I'm going to go to you first. And because you may not stay for much longer, I might give you more than 30 seconds, but other panelists don't get any ideas. Only Stefano gets it, the 30 seconds. So Stefano Boeri, we will only make a historic leap forward when?
Thank you. Well, what I believe is that imagining the future, thinking about it in terms of, let's say, a radically new city, for instance, or a gradual transformation of the urban places of our life, has become such an arduous and difficult exercise with the pandemic. It is as if we were anchored to a kind of gloomy present that leaves us no respite and forces us to debase day after day the most precious habits of our being together. Well, I believe that we have really to react, and we need to open up a different perspective, that of a planet crossed by great corridors of biodiversity, where forests and cities coexist, where historical villages return to being community of life, and where metropolises become archipelagos of vital places. Well, it's a new world that doesn't ask us for major revolutions, but rather an intelligent acceleration of trends already underway. Thank you so much.
Stefano, thank you for those opening thoughts. I know that there would have been some really great extra thoughts there as well, but I'm going to insist that you go and relax now and rest because you need to get better. We want you to get better. Stefano, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Karina Gould, Minister. Is it okay to call you Karina? I appreciate it. I'm coming to you next. We will only make a historic leap forward when, and don't forget to unmute.
Sure, thank you. And yes, I'm Canadian, so we don't need all the formalities. It's totally fine. But I think for me, thinking about that, it's about recognizing and being willing to address the power imbalances that we currently have in society and in the world. I think that one of the things that COVID-19 has, shone or put a magnifying glass on is where those inequalities are and how we, for too long, have ignored them or brushed them under the rug. And I think particularly, when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to the burden of care work that a lot of women have to take on, that this is an area that we really have to work on when we think about who has access to power, who has access to markets, who has access to resources, and whether that's being equitably distributed. That's something we need to reimagine and recognize that actually we're all going to be better off when we share that access to power in a more equitable way.
Okay, thanks, Karina. I'm really impressed at how people are keeping to time. No pressure. Next speakers, Natasha Mwanza. We will only make a historic leap forward when.
Everything in me is tempted to say when we actively and meaningfully involve young people in all decisions that we make. But then honestly, we'll only make that big leap and change and turn things around when we actually become more accountable for our own actions and when we take responsibility. Because when we become more accountable, we get to realize that with every action that we take, we are actually either helping or disadvantaging someone. And if we can also become more inclusive and more empathetic with everyone that's around us, then we can put ourselves in their shoes and vice versa, and we can actually change the world. So honestly, it's a call to accountability. Until we become accountable and realize that our actions affect everyone around us, we will not make progress. Whether we are young, we're old, we're female, we're male, accountability is key. And that's the one thing that we need to start doing a lot more. And that's one of the biggest things we can do to achieve and make progress and take the leap that will turn things around. Thank you.
Awesome, Natasha. Thank you so much. Lisa, over to you. Lisa John. We'll only make a historic leap forward when.
When we learn from our past and recognize that a fully empowered, networked, and well-resourced civil society is a public good that no country can do without. There is not a single moment in the entire history of humankind where transformative change has not happened because of collective action. And I think for governments to push back on public protests or to push back on people power is simply denying the way in which human society has evolved. And we really need much more of the feminist leadership, which allows us to engage with dissent, which allows us to listen to what people on the ground are saying and build and actually co-create new realities together.
Some great ideas coming out here. Bayo Kamolafe, last one to you. We'll only make a historic leap forward when.
Great. The Yoruba people have a proverb that goes, if you want to find your way, you must be willing to become lost. I like that because it challenges the notion of forward. Forward has been an imperial direction and has haunted many communities for a long time. So I would say maybe at this point in time when our anthropocentricity is being challenged by pandemic, by the very specter of climate change, by the Anthropocene, we're being invited to lose our way.
Wow, thank you, panelists. Fantastic ideas. I mean, this is great weekend thinking as we head, as we have a Friday afternoon or Friday evening, wherever you are. This is fantastic starter. Thank you all very much. We're going to delve deeper a little bit now, and you can go a little bit longer than 30 seconds here. Karina Gould, I'm going to start with you to follow up first. Sticking with this theme of making a historic leap forward, you've talked in the past about something called social governance. And I'm interested to understand how you feel that social governance, or you think social governance, and well, I want to get an understanding of what you mean by that first. And also, how can social governance and climate action help us make that leap forward in the way that you've suggested?
Yeah, thanks, Rajesh. I was worried you were going to turn to me first again, because everyone else has such wonderful things to say as well. But I think, social governance is making sure that government works for people and is responsive to people and inclusive of people. And I think that, building a little bit on what actually all of the other panelists said, Natasha, about accountability, right, for our actions and as government, because I strongly believe that government can be a force for good in people's lives, but only when and if we're listening and working with the people who we are there to serve. And I think that also builds on what Lisa was saying in the importance of having a strong, active, vibrant civil society that is working with and pushing government to be better, and government is engaging and listening in a respectful way. I think civil society plays such an integral part in continuing to include the needle on inclusion for the programs that government should be providing to their citizens. And I think maybe to what Bayo was saying in terms of recognizing that people do not live in distinction or separate from the planet that we inhabit, and recognizing that part of responding to people's needs is making sure that we're also having good governance that's responding to the planet's needs. Because if we don't have clean air to breathe, and we don't have clean water to drink, and we don't have clean soil in which to grow our food, then we're not responding in a way that's going to support people. So I think there's an unquestionable link between serving people in a way that is going to be inclusive, but is also going to make sure that we're addressing the fight against climate change, the loss of biodiversity, because they're intricately connected.
So people don't live separate from the planet. And Natasha's point, I think you're also saying this, that people don't live separate to their own actions. She was the one who was saying, we've got to take responsibility for our own actions. So Natasha, let me turn to you next. You've spoken a lot about the need to involve young people, especially women and girls, in decisions that affect their lives. To what extent do you see that dialogue happening? And how do we turbocharge progress in that area?
Okay. To what extent do I see this happening? I think it's happening more and more often in the world that we live in today. Young people are being involved more and more, mostly because we're also demanding for it more and more. And it's really good, because then it shows that we are now recognizing that we are powerful and we're capable enough, and that we have ideas and the energy as well that's needed for us to actually bring out the change that we want to see and that we actually want to be. And so honestly, it is happening more and more, but then it just has to become more meaningful and impactful. And that's where we get on how can we actually see this happening more. And one of the biggest things that I believe we can do is to invest in the younger generation. I think sometimes we forget that, in as much as we are, for instance, fighting for spaces, even in as much as we are fighting for a seat at the table, for instance, we still need to understand what exactly that involves. And we don't have as much experience as it takes to actually fully understand and comprehend what all that is. So once we begin to invest in young people, in their leadership skills, in everything that they actually want to be, and let them be that from a young age, then they'll grow up using that experience and that information, that knowledge, to be wise, and they'll take up these positions with ease. So one thing that we really need to do, and one thing is key, is investing a lot in them, their abilities, for them to actually take up these positions. And then let's see young people as partners. Sometimes that's the idea that we have. And honestly, the different generations that we live in, and the older generation right now, is taking this good. I like that we are more meaningful and we're more open to having young people speak out. We're more open to young people's ideas. But then sometimes it feels as though young people can be seen as more of beneficiaries instead of partners. And that can be very disappointing, because at the end of the day, I'm not here because, it's just going to maybe lighten up the show, this youthful energy in the room colors it up. I'm not here for that. I'm here to actually bring in my ideas and also change the world. So until you start seeing us as partners and not just beneficiaries or someone to light up the room, then we won't make any meaningful progress, because it will end at me just saying all these things, and then what? Because I don't have the power, because I'm not seen as powerful enough, I won't be able to bring in that change. So the idea is, yes, we have made progress. Yes, we are involving young people, but make sure it's meaningful and see them as actual partners and not just beneficiaries. And then it also comes down to the younger generation itself. I think one thing that we cannot deny is that we are very radical. We are very, we'll go for whatever we have to, we'll go for it. We can be very rebellious as well until we see what we actually want to change. But then it also takes a lot of patience, a lot of growth, and a lot of understanding for us to know what exactly has to be done. So I think when we come together really and just sit down and think of how can we be partners in this and how can we actually make progress, then we'll go far. And then the younger generation has to understand that the older generation is not looking to stop us. They're not looking to block us. If anything, I feel like sometimes they're just a bit concerned because they feel as though they've been down this road and they've made mistakes and maybe they don't want us to go through that. But then the best way to actually help us understand and know that is to just have conversations with us beyond the partnership, beyond anything else. Let's just have conversations. Let's not forget that we are two different people, two different sets of skills, two different sets of experiences. And if we can talk about that, we can learn a lot from each other. We can actually work together better. So for me, honestly, just have a conversation, be partners, and then understand that we are not beneficiaries. We are actually key partakers in these key stakeholders, and that we hold the power to actually bring the change that we want to see. So until we do that and realize that the young people are not meaningfully being involved and participating, and unfortunately, we may only make the change when we actually do stuff that the world may not like, but if we have to do it, we'll do it.
Natasha, really great points. I want to follow up very quickly in just like 30 seconds. How can young people help older or decision makers see young people as meaningful partners? Because you say that's the shift that needs to happen. How can you help that happen, or what needs to happen to make that change?
How can young people help decision makers see that we're actually part of the solution? Well, I think the first thing we can do as young people is to understand that the older generation or the decision makers that may not necessarily be young are not giving us a deaf ear. I think sometimes that's the attitude that many young people can sometimes go with, thinking as though the older generation does not want to hear us, or maybe they feel as though we're not capable enough. I think when we get rid of that veil, when we understand that that's not their goal, that is not what they're trying to do, then we can actually make progress and reach out better. And then another thing that we should also understand is we cannot always wait for them to make decisions on our participation for us to actually participate. Sometimes you have to give people a foretaste of what they're missing out on for them to actually realize that they're missing out on something. So I think young people should keep on doing what they're doing and then just accelerate at it. Let's keep on engaging. Let's keep on doing the most with whatever work that we have to do. If we want to see certain change, let's not wait for the government or for this leader to do it. If you're able to do it in your own community, then go ahead. If you're able to provide those clothes, you're able to provide that water, you're able to go and even just talk to the president. We have social media, and that's another thing. We have this amazing tool as young people in this generation and even in these times, social media, and we are so good at using it. It can literally reach anyone. So if we can just package our messages well enough to reach the right people so that we can actually, engage with them and let them know what our pleas are. And let's not give up. I think that's another thing that we need to develop with young people. Be resilient with it. Sometimes they might not always be responsive, but then if we keep on going and going, then we can do more. So honestly, it's those. Let's realize that they also want to partner with us, and let's just go for it. Thank you.
Natasha, some great points. I pity the person who has to follow you, but someone does have to, and that's Lisa. Lisa John, over to you. This might be a time when you're hoping your video connection breaks up, right? No, I'm joking.
No, in fact, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Jump right in. I'll follow up the question.
No, I wanted to just build on that. I was actually going to say something else, but I heard Natasha and I was like, I need to come in right now. I think the amazing thing about what's happening with change right now, and we at Civic have an annual State of Civil Society report, which we brought out for the last 9 years, is the, kind of really clear signal that change is basically being driven in non-traditional sections of society at large. So it's not the traditional organizations, it's not traditional decision-making spaces, it's not governments, it's not businesses, it's not even the old-fashioned NGOs. It's really people who have in the past had nothing to do with public decision-making, who are coming out in the millions across the world. And the most inspiring part of all of that is that in the last 5 years, we've seen that every single local incident, whether it's a WhatsApp tax or a food related crisis or something else, it quickly escalates into a global movement of solidarity. And moreover, I think the ability of both women and young people who are traditionally out of the table, right, or away from the table of power, to convert that into a call for systemic reform has been phenomenal. And Black Lives Matter represents that, Me Too represents that. But I think in a way for civil society, it's a huge win that, we've spent decades trying to build the linkages between local infractions or local, kind of misdemeanors and the global systemic challenges. Right now, we don't have to do that anymore. I think just the access to information, the ability to make those connections has been so large that it kind of makes it all the more important for governments to not wish away the problems that they need to address. And I think that's the most important task right now.
Let me
for
just
us.
follow up with you on that point, because this is the question I was going to pose to you. Actually, just picking up on your I think you've correctly explained that we're at a stage where movements are really big. They're disaggregated, they're all over the world, they're connected by technology, and they're really big and powerful and important. But COVID has also shown us that communities are stepping in where public services have failed or been overwhelmed, which is a good thing, another sign of networks and movements, community. At the same time, the civic space is shrinking, and governments in some places are clamping down on free speech and on freedoms. Sometimes, freedoms during COVID, that's done in the best interests of people in mind. But sometimes they're taking advantage of the crisis to stifle dissent. So what is how do you also, on one hand, celebrate the rise of movements, but respond to the shrinking of civic space?
So I think it's just
if others want to come in too, that's great.
So I think what we've seen in the past year is this kind of complete contradiction, where on one hand you've seen civil society in all its diversity, so every possible form of civic action emerge and thrive and just go out of their way to respond to the pandemic. And on the other hand, you've seen that governments have really disproportionately used emergency laws and emergency measures to repress, restrict, and almost remove civil society in all spaces except service delivery, right? So I think where governments have not felt threatened, and this includes established democracies, so we're not just talking about traditionally kind of repressed and closed governments, but currently 87% of the world's population, according to the Civicus Monitor, lives in contexts where they cannot freely exercise their civic freedoms. And a quarter of the world actually lives in contexts where you can routinely be injured, imprisoned, or even killed for simply speaking out or exercising your right to association or assembly. And the attacks on peaceful protesters were, in fact, the #1 global violation in 2020. So it just shows this very uneven kind of territory where you need citizens to be more responsible. And like Natasha was saying, or Karina was saying, we need more partnership between governments, between businesses, between citizens. But on the other hand, you've had more laws introduced last year to repress citizens and to repress civic action than any other time in this decade. So I think that's the kind of tension we really need to address and unpack, in this year and in the coming years as well.
Okay, Lisa, thank you. Bayo Komolafe, I want to shift gears slightly, but you should feel free to respond to stuff you've heard. But particularly with you, you host an online course from your home in India, and it's called We Will Dance with Mountains. And I want to read out to people the first line of your course description, because I think it's really illustrative and relevant to our conversation. Your course description starts like this: what would change if we took seriously the consideration that the world is alive, that we derive our being from a never static, ever-changing field of entanglements, and that we are not the center of the universe? I'm going to invite you just to apply that to the social and economic crises that the pandemic has caused and that it's exacerbated and exposed, and talk a little bit about how do we then build a more sustainable future.
I think, with great respect to all my fellow panelists here, I think we're also witnessing at some level a deep exhaustion with systems and how we have been organized to create change. It seems like contemporary activism is increasingly becoming part of an architecture that reinforces the very same things we're trying to outwith or move away from. So what is emerging right now is a conversation around the colonial presence of what some philosopher, Giorgio Agamben, well, he's not some philosopher, he's a very famous one, called the anthropos, or the anthropological machine. It's this way of organizing ourselves that speaks the language of agency, that speaks the language of activism, but that reinforces the very same things we try to escape from. So I guess the course and the things that I talk about and the communities that I engage are saying, what if the nature, that thing we're trying to serve, that which we're trying to make better, what if it's trying to make us a better place? What if the world is vital and alive and agential, and feminist discourses, indigenous traditions have been saying this for a long time, that we're still acting as if we're in charge. We're still acting as if we have our act together. We're still acting as if we're in the center of the room, planning the way forward. Sometimes forward, gets in the way of transformation. So the invitation here is, maybe we can slow down and build wild coalitions that allows the world to be part of its mattering, and not to presuppose that we're the only ones in the room that are, applying agency to a world that is just a passive recipient of our benevolence.
I like the idea of wild coalitions. I would like to be part of a wild coalition with all of you. Thank you very much. Great answers. I'm just actually going to read a bit of social media that's going on, because as you can imagine, people are really engaging, excuse me, with this session. And as you can imagine, Natasha, you're lighting up the hashtag as well. Natasha Mwanza, someone to pay attention to and support, says someone on social. Great quote from Karina Gould: government can be a force for good, but only when people are listening. Someone else, absolutely floored by Natasha Mwanza's passion and energy. And then someone also reminding us, that's what Stefano Boeri said, to make a historical leap forward, it doesn't always take a major revolution, but intelligent acceleration of trends that are already underway. And I like that idea of trends that are already underway, because I want to kind of pick up on that for a few minutes and just open mic session with you panelists. So jump right in to think about, if these trends are already underway, there's got to be a starting point, right? Where do we start? You've all talked a bit about perception and changing our perceptions of each other and our place in the world, but also about institutions. Where do we start? What's the starting point in this process? Or is it, as Bio says, a wild coalition that has different actors starting in different places, all working in the same direction? I hope I haven't answered your questions for you, but I'm going to throw it open to whoever wants to jump in first, or I will point at someone and pick someone. Karina Gould, go ahead. And then Natasha after you.
Well, how about Natasha goes first, because she's got such passion and energy. And maybe just a quick comment on that, Natasha, that I think like as policy leaders and government leaders, like it's important for us to listen to young people, because you energize us to keep going and energize us to think differently about the future. And then I'll get to the question, but go ahead, Natasha.
Thank you so much for that, Karina. I think I love the part where you said we energize you to think about the future, because that's one thing. That's a place where we see young people at, but then we don't realize that young people are young now, and in the future we may not be so young. And this drives me to the point, the question that has just been asked: how do we look at what's already being implemented now, what's already existing, and how do we just advance that? I remember this one time I was sitting down and talking to a lecturer of mine, and we were discussing the sustainable development goals, and he was of the idea that we shouldn't even call them sustainable development goals, because development in itself is supposed to be sustainable. So why then should we add that? Because automatically it should be there in the development. And so that brings us to how sustainable these things are. And I think one way we can actually look at that is by firstly looking at how much progress we've made. Honestly, sometimes I feel as though we do not appreciate ourselves enough for how far we've come, and we don't recognize that sometimes. Sometimes it's really good to look at the brighter picture and look at how far we've come. What have we done so far? This is the progress we've made. This is how far we've come. This is how many lives have been impacted. So why not give ourselves a round of applause? We can look back and say, okay, this is good. And then what else is left? So I think that's one of the big things that we can start with: how far we've come. And then from there, we can look at our past mistakes, just as Miss Lisa had said earlier, that we won't make progress with the future if we don't learn from the past mistakes that we've made. And so I think it's also sitting down and looking at what's not working and how we can get rid of that to replace it with what's actually working, or more of what's actually working. So it's honestly something that we will not be able to achieve immediately. And it's also something that we need a lot of patience with as a result. But then I think these are two key things that we need to look at. And then we also need to look at a system and involving people in the system that will make it more sustainable. And that's why we cannot ignore the fact that young people have to be involved, because in as much as we are going to be the future, we're also the present. And we can take up the leadership now, but then also later on, it will be on our responsibility to not just lead it then, but then also take care of those that are coming up. And so this is why we need to be meaningfully involved, because that's where the sustainability key is, because it's not just the now, it's the future as well, and even the past. And we are that right now as young people. So I think these are three key things that we need to look at. Let's appreciate the progress we've made. Let's learn from the mistakes, but let's also involve young people, because they are key to sustainability. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rajesh. I think that was a great way to start it. And I guess I don't know if wild coalitions is the right way to talk about it, but the collective consciousness that we need to have to make these changes, I think, is really important. Because if we think about climate change or biodiversity loss, it's not going to be any individual action, but it won't also happen without collective action. And so I had this wonderful conversation with Mary Robinson around this time last year, the first female president of Ireland, who said, we need to be thinking both in terms of collective action and individual action, because to make the changes to actually address the climate crisis and the even bigger crisis that's looming with the biodiversity collapse, we have to collectively make different choices, but we also have to be willing to make those choices as individuals. And so I think it's recognizing where we are today, but in a really honest way. There are some things that are incredible. I mean, in terms of, what we've been able to do, and health or nutrition, education, we have made incredible gains for humanity as a whole. And we've been able to assert some of that control that humanity has been trying to have over nature for, since the beginning of time. But at the same time, also recognize that our actions have an impact, and that we can't operate in isolation from what's happening around us. And so we have to identify and address the things that we're doing that are harming the planet, which ultimately harm humanity as well. But we can't do that just as individuals or just as a collective. And so I think this rising consciousness that's happening around the world is so important. And that's where civil society plays such an important role, to push governments to make sure that we are responding to what people are asking and demanding. And I think, that's the exciting part of being in a democracy or being in a civic space, is having that, that collective conversation and actually working for change. So anyways, I'll leave it there.
See if I can jump in here. Since the 1970s, we've been trying to combat climate change. We've been, Lisa, did you want to say something?
No, please go ahead. I'll come in.
Sorry, I just, thank you. So we've been trying to combat climate change. I mean, since the very first Earth Day, when the first book was released and said we have to do something about climate change yesterday. The questions that some of us are asking, and I don't think it's a small group, I think it's many people are beginning to ask or have been asking, is what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? I mean, there is a sense in which, and I know this is not something to be said, maybe it's not something to be said in a UN meeting, but there is something deeply spiritually amiss about the ways we speak about development and continuity and the expectations that we will continue in an unbothered fashion. People like me and communities like mine have been the recipient of good intentions. For a long time, we've been told that if only we sit like this or posture our bodies this way or learn these ideas or these terms, that things will get better eventually. But there, and I cannot stress this enough, there has been this toxic cyclicity. We just keep on repeating the same words, repeating the same dynamics, and going back over and over again. I feel my response to this is an invitation to be humble. Like, if anything is paramount in a pandemic and in the Anthropocene, it's the need to come down to earth. It's the need to be humble about our senses of continuity. It's a need to revalidate or recalibrate our bodies to a world that exceeds us, that is inviting us to re-notice ourselves within a larger scheme of happenings. And that is probably the most difficult thing to do. I know we can come up with beautiful solutions. What I'm trying to say here is that our solutions have often come in the way of the needed transformations we seek. And this is not just on nation states and civic society, it's on all of us together. So this is more than just individuals, like my sister Karina said, and more than collectives. This is an invitation to find the middle, to find the more than human, to notice ourselves again as actors within a larger stream of actors, and not to rush forward, because it has been to the racialized suffering and pain of not just nature, but people that look like me.
Okay, I don't want to cut off your flow, but I'm just got one eye on the clock. We only have about 3 minutes left for the session. Lisa, I'm just going to invite you to make a quick point, then I have a really quick fire round to finish with. So off you go.
Okay. So just to say that the movements of the present are both intergenerational and intersectional. And this is, in fact, a terrifying time for activists, journalists, human rights defenders, because the level of violence and intimidation that we've seen in the past year has been unprecedented in the last decade. But it also shows, I think, just the sense that, people with authority, whether state or non-state actors, know that every single person has the capacity to be an activist today. You don't have a kind of an elite group of change makers who are sitting and talking about change. It's every single person who has the access to information, who's thinking about systemic change, who's speaking up, who's acting for change, and that's why it's so hard and so unstoppable, really, in terms of the momentum that we're seeing and creating right now.
Okay, thanks, Lisa.
That's quick enough.
In actual fact, that sort of feels like an end point, a last thought. And actually, my last quick fire round to you all was, how do you want the festival participants to think differently in the future to help redesign the future we want? So, Lisa, I'm going to just extrapolate what you said into that as basically saying, start thinking of yourselves as activists and movement makers and change makers. Bio, how would you answer that in just 30 seconds? What do you want festival participants to do differently?
Start learning to live in a world that is irreparably uncertain, where certitude and confidence might just be a luxury. Start learning to lose our way and to be humble about the next. Maybe I'll leave it at that.
God, I love that thought. I'm going to do your course. Actually, I want you to take your online course. Karina, and then I'm going to finish with Natasha.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think something that we need to take away and think about is approaching our work with more humility. I think Bio's point about the role of development, both in terms of something that has, obviously encouraged development and greater human dignity, but on the other hand, in some cases, re-entrenched institutional discrimination or racism is something that we need to really reflect upon. And I think that, just like the Black Lives Matter movement has had an impact on, broader society, it also has to have an impact in terms of what we do as a development community, how we think about things, and the approach that we're taking. And certainly from our perspective in Canada, we're trying to think more about how we work as co-creators, how we work as partners, and not as, someone that's going in and telling a community how to work. And so I think that's a really important takeaway to build a more inclusive world.
Okay, Natasha, take us home. You have exactly 30 seconds. What do you want people to do differently?
Thank you so much. what Bio had said earlier on about how sometimes, we keep hearing the same things over and over again. And sometimes you wonder, what is it that we're not doing to actually actualize what we've been talking about? And so for me, the key thing is really that we should be able to hold ourselves accountable for what we're doing, and we should be able to act on it. But then we should also be able to tell the stories, because honestly, there's a lot that we could have missed out on if we didn't have such a panel for people to tell their stories in a certain way. So I think that's key in doing that. And I think I've run out of time. So really, I believe that the key is, let's be accountable, let's more, and let's tell these stories, because with these stories we inspire people to actually do more, and that's the turning point for everyone. So let's change the world together, and it's been awesome being part of this panel. So thank you all, and yeah, have an amazing festival.
There you go. There you go. I have a feeling people are going to be hearing much more from you, Natasha, so don't worry about running out of time today. Panelists, thank you for a fascinating conversation. Thank you for setting the scene, really whetting people's appetite for the rest of the Festival of Action. Nadira, with that, I'm going to hand it back to you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.